I honestly feel like I shouldn't even have a microphone and I should just wander around out there for the 7 of you who are here. I flew in from San Francisco yesterday, so I'm both jet lagged and full of caffeine, and I have too much to talk about, so I'm going to zip through and feel free to throw something or take notes and ask questions. I'm realizing now when I wrote this title for this, I thought the controversial part would be about atom bombs. But I think it's actually the what if product doesn't matter, because at this show, obviously, product matters. So I think people looked at this and went, yeah, I'm not going to that, because I know product matters, so what do I care? Let me move us forward. First, a handful of disclaimers and apologies. One is an apology to Portugal for the possibly offensive, semi-random metaphor, which I also realize is awkwardly American with atom bombs. The context of this is that I keep thinking everybody knows what it is I'm going to talk about today. We sort of just discovered it at our studio and are synthesizing it into kind of a worldview. So I feel like Portugal inventing an atom bomb, and everybody around us has an atom bomb already, but we're like going, uranium, oh, this is awesome. And people go, well, of course uranium. Like, how can you not know that? But for us, it's kind of a new paradigm. But I keep finding that people don't, which is don't know it or aren't thinking of it in a, in a holistic way. So at some point, I'm going to run into the fact that everybody knows it, which is point 2 here, which is this may not be new, so I'll apologize in advance. That day may be today. Third part is that there's a little imposter syndrome going on. I'm going to be talking about marketing and UA, and I'm a lifetime producer, game developer, studio operations person. So this is really more about the journey to thinking about the world in a different way and how that impacts ideas of game development than a lot of very specific how-tos. I came from a very traditional PC background. These are some of the things I worked on in my life, PC and console. And I've gone on this journey to free-to-play, and like Saul of Tarsus, I've been enlightened on this different worldview, which is starting with performance marketing conversion and then return on ad spend conversion. That's really changed the way I think about this whole thing. I happened to be having dinner with Jen about 2 months ago and said a bunch of stuff, and she said, this sounds really controversial. You should come to Prague and irritate people with this, and I love nothing better than that, so that's why I'm here. But really, it's about moving from this designer vision view of how we do things to a customer-driven. And I know people tend to think of, well, you're using metrics, it's taking all the design out, it's not fun anymore. I look at it differently, which is, my time at EA, there was a lot of people pitching ideas, and if they didn't make sense, and you'd say, this doesn't make sense, and people would say, oh, they just don't get it. You just don't get it. Really, the question is, how do you put it in front of players and see if they get it? That's really what we want to get to. So come with me on a quick thought experiment journey, which is the title of this. What if product doesn't matter? First, a handful of assumptions to start with. Hopefully, everybody's kind of familiar with this concept. Return on investment. This is kind of microeconomics 101. In fact, in my college, I think it was, in fact, microeconomics 101. This is the variable cost part of the world. Your return on investment is what do you get minus what do you spend, right? It's pretty straightforward. But the thing is, in the free-to-play world, where my journey has taken me to, this is the foundation. We spend a lot of time on DAU and ARPDAU and payer percentage and payer purchase size and revenue per payer and D7 retention and D1 retention. And those are all just stars to guide us to the real thing, which is, what is our ROI? And we all know that, but I don't know if we all as developers how much we build our real plans based on just, no, this is the important factor and what goes into these factors and us understanding all of those components. But that's not that simple. What about all the other costs? What about handling cash? What about everything else? We'll put that aside. We'll come back to it later. But let's just start with the operational side of this transaction as a transaction with the player. Assumption part 2 and this was kind of a weird thing for me, most of you guys probably know this, but a lot of people in our industry think, well, I'm trying to get the lowest CPI because that optimizes my revenue. And the answer is I don't want just the lowest CPI. I want all the profitable CPIs. If I make $5 for a lifetime value and I can buy somebody for $4.95, then I'll take it because it's 5 cents profit, right? I want to be as profitable as I can. It's not just take a budget, spend as low as you can. It's spend as much as you can profitably. That's the way to optimize all of your revenue in this space. So you want all the profitable CPIs you can get. And part 3 is there isn't a single lifetime value, right? Every player has a different lifetime value. They're all slightly different. They might spend on one part of your game and not the other. Some don't spend on any. Some see ads if you have ads in your game. So really, the exercise you want to do is figure out how do you match that lifetime value to that cost per install. So you can go buy incredibly expensive players as long as they return more. At the end of the day, if you're finding one player who you get for $30 and gets 40, 10 players who you spend 3 and get 4, it's all the same. It's just return on ad spend. What am I getting back for the amount of money that I can spend optimizing in this whole world of LTVs and CPIs? So there's a guy I worked with at GSN until recently who came into the industry as an analytics guy, and he came from Merrill Lynch because his deal was, it's just arbitrage. I'm finding a market wherever I can find a market. He was the guy that was telling me, yeah, we went to Australia with our casino game and we made, we had players with $80, $100 CPIs. So, at the time, our company wouldn't spend that much. We wouldn't spend $50 CPIs, but for them, they were just, we'll do whatever. It's purely return on ad spend. So this is kind of the fundamental. I just need to get more than I'm spending. How do I measure better to understand the different markets I might be in and what kind of players are having what kind of LTVs? And really what it comes down to is how do I use information to more accurately figure out where I can spend money and to better increase lifetime values so I can go and spend more money. So far, this is all just math. And for those of you who can't tell, Taylor Swift is saying, it's just math. It's that simple. Why do we care as developers about all of these user acquisition gymnastics? So, many years ago, a friend of mine and Chris's, Don Matrick, who has gone on to lead large global organizations, started a revolution at EA when he stopped it being about development risk and turned it into market risk. Of all the things that you can control as a developer, the thing you least control is the market. So you can crunch, as we often did in those days. You can change your scope and timeline. You can change all sorts of stuff. You can't change the market. The market wants what you have or they don't. And it's really figuring that out is the most useful thing. So I used to also say at EA when I was there, and people would say, oh, as a game producer, what do? You do you design? Do you manage? And I used to say, the single most important thing as a game producer is to mitigate risk relative to investment. How do we just make sure that we're not blowing money like mad? How do we find out as early as possible what our risks are, and how do we mitigate them? So you can probably tell where I'm going with this. What does $100,000 buy us in dev knowledge if we spend it on, I don't know, more art, better art, more motion capture technology? What does it buy us in market knowledge if we had that $100,000 to find out, do I have anything here or am I lost? All this suggests that the way to go about this, and I actually was thinking, I went to Florian's talk earlier today about how to go from 20 users to 20 million users without any spend at all, thinking, well, that's just going to shoot a hole right through my thing. But it doesn't. It's just that he has no cost per install, or he has no hard cost per install. But he went about his development side the same way. Developed to the absolute minimum spec. What is it, 4 soldiers, 2 maps? That's it. How quickly can we get it out there? Market in the smallest possible way to generate data. And basically figure out early on, do you have something or do you not have something? And the thing that's interesting about this is how it can change potentially the relationship between the publisher and the developer, and even as an internal studio. It's changing our relationship as a solitaire studio with the rest of GSN. I think everybody, we've talked about this for years, right? Fail early, fail quick. Some question is, how much discipline do we have to do that? And how do we think about that whole product from start to finish? From UA to churn, from features and segmentation and marketing tools, all as part of the package of what you're trying to figure out. And then think about your investment just for scaling, not for proving. Prove it yourself. Florian's still waiting for his scaling money to come in because he's managed to scale without it. But I think he was also saying in his talk, we all can't count on this particular model, this particular organic growth. So for most of us, UA becomes important. So what developer doesn't want to leverage a money printing machine before asking for a lot of investment, right? If you can walk in and say, I'm cranking out money. For every user I get more money. If you can prove that, if you can demonstrate that, then you have much better leverage in talking with a publisher. Again, even an internal publisher. What publisher doesn't want to reduce risk before throwing big bucks at something at scale? So I haven't seen a lot of this relationship. We actually kind of have this at the moment at GSN Games for a variety of reasons. We grew a lot in 2017 just by having features that induced our players to pay more money because we had great new features we were adding. In 2018, we scaled up a lot in growth. We have way more users than we've had in the past because our publisher understood from the dynamics of our model that we could show them that we were clearly a money-making machine, and as much we could throw at it, they would profit from that. In order to make that happen, you need a handful of things. One is you need to buy into the idea that there's a discrete point where you can demonstrate that you understand the relationship of LTV and CPI for your product, that you can show there are markets where we're profitable. Now the only question is, how big are they? Second is a hard launch date flexibility, which a lot of companies don't have. Managing the costs helps that, but if you're working for EA, a friend of mine was doing a Monopoly bingo game, and it was a free-to-play game, and he had learned the pain of making bingo, which I learned at Zynga on their bingo game, and finally convinced them to have a soft launch period and figure out, get the KPIs right, show that everything worked. And they said, okay, we buy it, we understand it. You have that. Your soft launch is in April, and you can have the time you need to get the KPIs right, as long as it launches in July. Okay, so EA is never going to be this company because they work differently. But for smaller groups, works better. Last piece is team ego-less design, because the idea of soft launch is you're going to get feedback, get there early. Who does this work for? Really, probably any kind of free-to-play company, whether you're an internal or an external studio. And if you're being driven by market dates and public numbers, then it's harder. Hopefully you have enlightened management. What are the 5 main gaps beyond those 3 key sort of foundational pieces? You need an LTV model. This is when I was working on a game after I left Zynga. This is where I got stuck. How do I know what the lifetime value is? One is you can get a publisher will have market data where available. You might get it from Apple. You might get it from Google. Some of it is just soft launch data. You just put a stake in the ground and say, here, we're going to try to do this. And you find out from your retention, from your yield, Yield, for those who don't know, I spent a bunch of money, and on day one, I got this much of it back, and on day 7, I got that much of it back, and hopefully sometime you get 100% of it back, and then you're profitable. You just iterate and segment. There's also machine learning partners. So I went to a conference called MAU, Mobile Apps Unleashed on something, in Vegas. It's free, and there's tons of people there who all live and breathe this model, and they're there to help, and I'll be referring to them as we go along. But there are people out there and companies that, for the cost of an engineer maybe on your team, can build you lifetime value models. They can build marketing stacks that provide you all kinds of information. And the deals continually evaluate. Even as you're figuring stuff out, you're just getting more data every day. Iterate, segment, iterate, segment. This is the only slide without graphics, because I was going to talk about UA. I was going to put like Facebook and Google and all that stuff, but then I realized that they're filming and I'm probably going to get sued if I use their logo and it's wrong. So this one's just clean. This is the most important thing. I've worked with a handful of people, or people I know who have left Zynga and gone off, started their own companies. They've all run into the same kind of experience. They make this game, they hit alpha, and they completely focus on UA. And they realize that they didn't need to build all the features they built, because really, until they find their market, it doesn't matter, right? You find out what value you're getting, and then if you need to add more features, you do that if you think that's going to improve your lifetime value. But really, the thing to do is get to market and find out quickly, and then optimize your creatives and channels to figure out, will this channel get me a higher LTV audience? Well, then let's put more money there, and then that'll return some more money that we can go further build out the product. One thing is, UA is such an integral part of the product as I think of the product now, which is much broader scope than the developers and artists, programmers, whatnot. Having someone on your team that understands this at Alpha is kind of fundamental. Otherwise, you're just wandering around asking questions and you're sort of at the mercy of other people. Find people who understand this part of the business, and they can be consultants even, but somebody who understands what this space is and how you go use it. There are also agencies and publishers who can help with the whole UA portion of this. Again, these people on the bottom, all people who are at the MAU conference, I'm not getting paid by them, by the way. I just went there and saw all sorts of great stuff, validated our worldview that there's a ton of people out here who are thinking this way. For those stars to guide by, measurement tools. One way to think about this, if product doesn't matter, is that your game is an expense. Building your measurement tools is an investment. I worked with a bunch of people who worked at a company called Product Madness. They got bought by Aristocrat. They make slot machine games. I was told the reason they called it Product Madness was because they didn't care what the product was. They tried everything. They just quickly made products, and they saw what has the best arbitrage here, what has the best profitability that we can find a market for quickly. They just happened to land on slot machine games. But as developers, we get tied to a vision. We get tied to an idea. We want to make that game, right? You might find yourself dropping that game. Again, I don't want to keep referring to Florian's talk, but you should watch it on videos. I'm assuming we get videos from this. But it's really some great stuff in there. They built their war game out of a messaging app with avatars. That's where they started. They turned it into a combat game. And a bunch of stuff didn't transfer, obviously. But if you build measuring tools so you can figure out what's working and what's not working, and how can I find those players, then you can use that and keep reusing that. Or maybe a publisher has one you can tap into. See if you can guess where these people have been met. MAU. One of the things also about these measurement tools is all of these companies have different, there's the concept of a marketing stack, which I learned in the last year and a half. We all know about the technology stack, full stack programmers. There's a marketing stack that starts with your data, and then your segmentation, and then your communication to players, and on and on. These companies all do some portion of that. You can mix and match figure out what do you guys want to handle yourself, what do you want to go and get from a third party. And it's all out there. You can sort of compose the whole stack. Many of them will say, we provide the whole stack with some limited capabilities. But there's an awful lot of this that's available. The small initial investment. This is part of the genesis of all of this. Talking with Jen about how much should we spend? How big, what should we go and spend on development? And I said, unless you're Florian's game, you're going to be spending a lot of money on UA to figure out whether you're right or not. So how quickly do you get there? All of these are things. I worked with a guy at Zynga who ran Farmville for many years, left, did a 3-reel slots game. And he was, I talked to him after he launched it, and he said, I was just torn about putting in a progressive jackpot. You got to have a progressive jackpot in a 3-reel slots game. And just after he launched it, he went, I didn't need to spend the extra month on that, right? You always think you need more to find out. And some other talk I was at today, they were talking about art. Oh, it was the wargaming marketing people, I think. If you're relying on art, like, the game's not fun. But once we get the art in, that's going to be awesome. Yeah, it never is. Maybe 2 games it is. Missed, maybe, I don't know. So all of this stuff, you convince yourself that it's critical. And, unless maybe it's a narrative game, and you need to sort of build the narrative in most of the systems. But for most games, and certainly free-to-play games, you don't need all that. So if you have a small initial investment, maybe you can go get an investor and not a publisher. Maybe you as a team can just decide. There's 5 of us. We have enough money to do it for 6 months, see where we get. I worked on a game after I left Zynga. I think we called it cleverly Clash of Dragons because, it's Clash of Clans, but we had more dragons. The designer that I worked with, he had this principle of, what kept him up at night is, there's something we decided in the very first week of this game that has doomed us for the next however long, year and a half, whatever development time it was. And he said this to me a lot. And at the end of the day, we did, right? Which was, we decided it was dragons. One of the UX things they probably will talk about at some point in these meetings is Clash of Clans. There's so many great things about it. But what I learned from my experience was the brilliance is how clearly the size, silhouette, motion, coloring of the troops conveys and differentiates them. When everything is a dragon, and you have to take a moment and figure out which dragon is this and what does it do, you're sunk, right? So we did not solve the very first fundamental problem of this game, and we spent a year and a half, and we did the graphics twice because our CEO didn't like the graphics. So, figure out quickly, have you made the fundamental mistake right off the bat, and do it in a quick early investment. This is probably the only thing you really need, and it's the only thing you want to need because that changes the dynamic with your publisher. LTV isn't cash flow. Somebody was asking a question also in a marketing thing earlier today, is having done some testing and seen an improvement, how did that change your LTV? It probably didn't. I ran an event today and it changed my cash flow at least. Maybe it changed LTV over the course of a lifetime, but it's going to be very hard to measure on an immediate basis. When the magic happens, you're financially screwed. Life becomes juggling how much can you spend and risk against future returns. Even the blade of the hockey stick gets expensive for smaller devs where you're just buying enough UA to find out what have you got here. And without a publisher or working for a publisher who gets this, and sometimes not even then, you have a money printing machine but no ink to run it with. So really, you want to end up in a place where, what could you get from publishers that you can't do as a game developer? You want maybe some initial funding money, maybe UA knowledge, but you can get that yourself. Maybe an LTV model, but you can get that yourself. Maybe some tools for measurement, but you can get that yourself. You probably just need scaling, right? So that's kind of the end of the thought experiment of what if your product doesn't matter, that really, we're looking at this as a arbitrage-driven UA exercise where one of your factors is an LTV that feeds into that formula and lets you know how do you run your business. Does product matter? Of course product matters, right? It's the genesis of all of this. It defines LTV. It changes LTV as you improve the product. It's your competitive differentiation that gets you there in the first place. It's the core of everything you do, and numbers never replace creative. All they ever do is test it. But in the world of asking for a 90-degree change to get a 10-degree change in behavior, just think of it as a numbers generator, and don't be tied to completing a vision or tied to a vision. Go to market incomplete for real-world research. Most of the people, as I've talked about, some of them, but a lot of people I've worked with in this space, found out afterwards that they didn't really need to execute the creative vision they had to really prove to the market. They get very committed to it. They're not going to understand it unless they really get where I'm going. No, they'll figure out, the market will figure out what you got. Identify yourself in this, immerse yourself in this return on ad spend worldview to understand what is that role of that product and how do I make it to work. And it would be great if I haven't worked as a third party with a publisher in a while, but it used to be the advance, like publisher's role was give you an advance, $17 million to go make something game. Chris is smiling because when we made games at 17 million was like the ante. The game was like another 25 and then 80 for the infrastructure. They took all the risk. They gave you royalties, except really, they don't. Maybe you get a buyout at the end. But basically, if we change the world to, these factors that publishers like, this is all I need from you. I don't need you to take all the risk. I don't need you to give me the seed money. I'm going to bring you something awesome, and you're going to have to, I'll be able to cut a better deal for that. Sell the product empirically. My last slide of disclaimers. I can't believe I must really be hopped up on caffeine here, or I must have skipped a slide or something. I'm not talking about League of Legends. I'm not talking about tanks. This is Solitaire Tri-Peaks. We're a pretty simple game, but we're top 50. I won't say we adhere to all of these principles, but we try to live this way for the most part. Maybe publishers already do work this way, but I tend to think not. Again, this sort of is a framework for how to think about the business. And everybody that I talk to, I expect already knows this, but many don't. So I'm thinking there are a lot of publishers who aren't thinking this way about how they might work with your game. And the last bit is, so I've been through pretty much every transition in the game industry. I started before there was an AOL. I started before, I think EA was just starting when I got out of college. And I've been through CD-ROM, I've been through the growth of the internet, I've been through sports games and edutainment and all sorts of things. This is my latest transition. I'm converted from Saul of Tarsus to St. Paul, and no evangelist like the converted. I'm having incredible fun figuring out how to make games smarter and how to operate games smarter, since I've got an extra minute and a half. I worked on a game where we launched a big new feature. Team was super excited. Launched it. That month, bookings shot up massively. Everybody celebrated. The world was great. 2 months went by, started to decline a little bit. 3 months went by, dropped like a rock. Everyone on the team freaked out. What did we do wrong? What's changed? We went to all the stars, went to all the KPIs. Couldn't figure anything out. Eventually it stabilized and we went, well, I don't know what that was, but that was kind of crazy. Because our teams weren't integrated, we didn't realize we had a UA buyer who was responsible for our Facebook buying. And she had hit a gold mine with an ad, and it brought in tons of players and tons of really high quality players in terms of monetizing. And we had that for 3 months, and then she quit. and she was somewhere else. And I was reminded of the old Stephen Wright joke where he's got the light switch in his house that he doesn't do anything and he keeps flicking it on and off, and eventually he gets a letter from somebody on the other side of the world that says, hey, quit flicking that light switch, would you? And that's kind of what it was. These people are doing this stuff over there. They're dealing with their stuff. We're running around with our hair on fire. We don't understand our business. We don't understand our product because it's not holistic enough. It's not inclusive enough. So understanding this larger package, how we market, how we target, how we do UA, and how we are efficient as a development organization in launching and operating is kind of changes the way you think about making games. That's it. So if there's any questions, I'll be happy to talk.
Thanks for the talk. The last example that you share about that team, I don't know if it was on Solitaire Tripix, that you released the feature and then had the...
Yeah, they don't want me to talk about specifics, but you know,
yeah.
For instance, say it was.
Well, it's not important the product in the end, but exactly that can happen a lot when you release a feature, given how the market is moving fast and there are many components. Different strategy of UA. I mean, just a new game competitor that just came in. So the way we have worked in companies like Booga as well before, where we were very heavy in A/B tests, to be able to measure that. Do you do something about it where you can actually measure the performance of a feature independently from the market?
Yes, absolutely. What we had done, though, was we A/B tested it. So there's A/B testing and there's A/B testing. So everyone has their threshold. If you talk to analysts and statisticians, they'll tell you need to run long A/B tests to really understand what's happening with your product. One of my analysts went to Twitch, and I talked to her about 4 months after she left, and she said, yeah, I've done one A/B test in this last 4 months. We have several running at a time, anything we do, and we operate constantly. And our philosophy is much more, let's be flexible, let's make changes, and let's have tools that are sort of dangerous, but let us go test and then find out things quickly if we can, and then we'll adjust accordingly. And our threshold for certainty is, I'm sure, far less than our analysts and statisticians would want. With that as a framing, we release this new feature, things look great. First month, it's like, it's turn on for everybody, right? And then it all goes downhill. But we've already sort of lost the A/B test ability, so now we're like, oh, we've done something that affects the entire game. But really, you're right. I mean, what ends up happening is you're constantly evaluating a number of signals, sort of like the stars in general of like, well, you know, our payer percentage hasn't gone down, but our revenue per payer, you know, it's different on iOS, but it's always different on iOS. Did we do something to the build, or is it a different market because we buy this on Android, but we buy this on iOS? So you're constantly evaluating. I'm not saying the answers are always clear, but you end up with signals of how to think about operating. And yes, A/B testing is absolutely fundamental.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Good to know that you did use it, but it's never perfect. I mean,
yeah,
also.
It would be one of the other, again, conversations in some meeting today. Talked about A/B testing in communities, and it's hard to A/B test in a game where there's chat, and we have clubs in Solitaire, and so 20% of the players have this new feature, 80% don't. They're in the same club. We generate, we spike player services tickets because people want to, how come they got that thing and we don't? So it's hard to do. It's something we live with for understanding, at least at a minimum, how our player behaviors are. But yeah, we try to not leave them on for too long.
Thanks.
Two questions. First, It's very interesting that you've lost all your passion for product. It's nice to see that you've made that final transformation in your career. I've heard about this sort of minimal sort of MVP product, get it out in front of the audience, get feedback. How do you reconcile that with brand? Because in another discussion, they were like, yeah, we put it out as a different publisher, different product, kind of, it's not our name, just to test, which seems interesting, because if it's a product that you can actually, that you get traction with, then do you want to lose that audience? So how do you deal with that as a sort of a problem in terms of testing? The brand, are you damaging your brand with a crappy product? How do you deal with that?
So I sat with two of my mentors in this space, one of whom was the guy from Zynga and the other was the guy from Product Madness, and they were talking about a license, and one of them said some big expensive license they'd seen somebody pay for, and one of them said, you know what I call that? And the other guy answered right away, I call that X million dollars in unverifiable CPI reduction. Like, their model of this is, like, you get a brand just to reduce the cost per install. You believe there's some value in, we have a Wheel of Fortune brand. Like, the Wheel of Fortune brand, the reason to put it on a game is because you go, oh, it's Wheel of Fortune. I'm more likely to go play it. I'm going to get a boost, a reduction in my cost to install, because I'm going to get more installations from people go, I recognize that, I'm going to go play it. There are other reasons to have a brand. You might have, creative spark, or maybe you believe it has a longer retention for players, which would then affect your lifetime value. But there's a way to forecast what you think that's going to be. Even if you don't know, you go find some data and make your best guess and see how that changes it. In terms of, and then talking with my friend from EA, well, actually, I don't think I talked about it in this talk, but he was doing, Monopoly Bingo. And he said, if I could do this all over again, I would launch this on PC or Facebook, unbranded, to know that my game core worked. And then I would go launch it on console, which is harder, right? Unbranded, to know that my KPIs transfer over correctly. And then I would go brand it and see what the value of the brand was. Now, EA would never stand, as you know, for that duration of how to do it, but I would do it that way, because honestly, if your game fundamentals are sound, then, and I'm going to lose that audience, well, cross-promote them over to the other game. You won't lose them, you'll be able to carry them, and if the game fundamentals are sound, they'll stay and you'll attract that audience anyway.
Second separate question, do you guys do price sensitivity A/B testing, and how do you condition the market for different prices if you do?
We have not done player unique price sensitivity, in that this player gets a million coins for $1.99 and this player gets 100,000 coins for $1.99. Again, partly because it's scary and we're kind of scared of what that impact would be to the market, although I've heard people talking today about how they do that. We haven't spent a lot of time on dynamic pricing, honestly, because we've had people come in and pitch us. There are people who will sell you on a dynamic pricing SDK that you integrate, and the model is we'll increase your revenue a certain amount and we'll take a percentage of the increase that you get. But the increase they talked about was far less than I felt, and that was proven that we could get on our own. It wasn't about the price sensitivity yet. So there's still a lot of room just by targeting what kind of offer you have, and when you're giving it to people, and specifically what you give to who. We do price. We do segmenting for prices based on what your spend level is, but you get offers that are consistent with your preferred spend level. You don't get more, more coins at the same spend level. We're starting to do some other kinds of price sensitivity testing to see how elastic it is for different people, but we haven't crossed that threshold because we just feel like we don't want that player services nightmare yet. We haven't figured out the right answer. But some people do it, just not us yet. Turns out this is the audience. This is not news. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech.